Welcome everyone to our podcast and webisode series called If You Don't Mind Me Asking, where we explore and ask as many questions as we possibly can in about 20 minutes about the lived experiences of people with disabilities. I'm here with my co-host Dan, and I'm Lucy, and we both work for Business Disability Forum.
Yeah, it's always fun, always a pleasure to do these podcasts, and even more so today because we're welcoming colleagues from BDF, George Wright, who's a Vice Service Officer here at BDF. So hello, George, welcome, all three of us here, so I'm pretty sure we can just say whatever we'd like. And so it'd be great to hear a little bit more about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Okay, are you doing your Stiller impression? Everyone watching this is probably way too young to know this. But anyway,
we know, yeah.
It was a good joke for me. So hi everyone, my name's George and I work at the Business Disability Forum. I've been around for around about 2 years almost, and prior to that I have had a long career in HR. So I've been a learning and development consultant. I've worked in management, helping to manage teams of up to around about 250 people. I've also been an HR generalist and an employee relations specialist, where I was specifically responsible for supporting managers and arranging for adjustments as part of my role as managing all sorts of interesting employee relations cases and supporting people with disabilities, health conditions and long-term sickness. On top of that, I have some lived experience. I've got some professional experience of disability. I've got some personal experience of it as well. So I've got a small handful currently of non-visible disabilities. I am neurodivergent, and I also care for my mum who has Alzheimer's, and we have several family members who have disabilities that are not immediately visible as well. So maybe it's something that runs in the family.
You're all gifted, yeah.
Yeah, we're all very gifted in different ways. So I come from a really small village as well, sort of on the East Suffolk kind of border with Norfolk. And I guess that's a little bit about me. What else would you like to know?
So I was going to say, you've touched a little bit around, a handful of disabilities. I think it's kind of, if you could just unpackage that a little bit for us about how disability has impacted on you. And again, we don't want to fluff this all up and go, oh yes, we have these things, but it's all marvelous. Let's cover all aspects of that, the good, the bad and the ugly almost, I think. There's not much ugly because it's all a beautiful world for George, but
I'll try and do that in the most palatable way that I can. I guess this may be watched before the watershed. So I was born with a condition called spina bifida, and it's a congenital birth defect where either various different parts of the spinal cord may not develop properly. And I had a really mild case, actually. So it was spina bifida occulta. And the only evidence of this was a birthmark at the base of my spine and a tiny little hole there. And everything on the face of it seemed normal until I got to about 18 months old. And then I stopped walking, I stopped being potty trained, and clearly something was wrong. And it transpires that this little hole had allowed for infection to enter my spinal cord, and I had meningitis in my spine at that point. So rushed down to Great Ormond Street Hospital, emergency surgery, one of my first one of my back surgeries actually, and then at the time held in traction for a couple of weeks as a little baby. And they didn't actually know at that point whether I was going to work. Well, I'm definitely working. Whether I was going to walk again. So I'm a little bit of I guess a unicorn in the spinal injuries world, whereas I've got an incomplete injury, so that I'm a walker, but I have damage to all of my nervous system from the point of the infection down. So that's one. I was happy with that one. Quite content, didn't really want to collect anymore. However, around about 5 years ago, I started to get some really bad fatigue. And interesting that, Dan, we were talking earlier about your post-COVID symptoms, sounds very similar. So maybe I got in there early. And I was falling asleep before dinner, having dinner, falling asleep after dinner, falling asleep on the floor, walking up a couple of flights of stairs, and my legs were just saying to me, don't want to do anymore, walking up a very small hill to get to the tube and finding it incredibly difficult. And lots of investigations later, after lots of tests, it transpires I have pancreatic insufficiency. And what this means is that my enzymes don't produce, my pancreas doesn't produce the enzymes that it's meant to for me to digest my food properly. So I don't absorb all the nutrients that I should. And this has led to all sorts of interesting impacts on me, as well as the chronic fatigue, some very, I don't know if they're unique gastrointestinal issues, but for someone who already has damage to their spinal cord and has retention with regards to their bladder and their bowels and precarious control, this is not the best thing to have happened to me. On top of that as well, very interestingly, I have been diagnosed as neurodivergent in this last year. So that explains a few more things as well. So there you go, a little handful, which I'm sure as life progresses will possibly get a little bit bigger. But just when you think you've got enough, they do keep coming.
It's the gift that keeps giving, isn't it, sometimes? And
yes.
I'm just going to very quickly touch on cake, because I do like a bit of cake. And I know when we talked last time, you can eat whatever you like, can't you, pretty much?
It's a real double-edged sword, because I always went through life being very, very jealous of people who can eat whatever they like and there are no consequences to this. And I have now become one of those people, however, with the consequence of having chronic fatigue. So I'm not really sure which is better. I used to quite like climbing mountains and doing lots of things and going to lots of places and trying lots of different food, going traveling, etc. But I can eat a lot of cake. I can get through a whole sort of family pack of crisps, not really any consequence. I dread to think what it might be doing to my insides, but from a weight perspective, no, quite difficult to put weight on now.
Do you still get like the sugar crash and that, or is that related to the pancreas? And if you have the cake, you sort of like, so you're not putting on the weight, but then, or at the same time, you're then going, oh, is this chronic fatigue? Or am I just exhausted because I've just had a Victoria sponge?
No, it's really interesting. Caffeine actually affects me really badly. Sugar, I do get crashes actually in terms of having to have sugar, and so I had to go through all these tests as well to see if I'm diabetic, because I'd go through I've got to eat whatever is in front of me right now, and I cannot stop eating. But in terms of like the sugar making me, and then no, caffeine does though, weirdly enough. Very sensitive to that.
Such a balance of all of the different elements with the different conditions. And I imagine, so it was particularly with, so, you know, as you'll have heard, we had a COVID pandemic, which is now over. If you read the papers, then it's not making the front of any of them anymore. So I'm pretty sure it must have gone. But it'd be interesting to know sort of like how the pandemic, well, how it did affect you and how it continues to affect you, because, you know, if you, unlike the papers, it is pretty much, it is still around, but you just don't hear as much about it now.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because it's a gift that keeps giving, I think. So I was identified as clinically extremely vulnerable because my pancreas doesn't work properly, so I'm much more likely to suffer from getting lots of infections. So I'm immunocompromised as well. Interesting enough, I can't actually fight a bladder infection off, so I'm on constant antibiotics. And getting a letter to tell me that I was shielding was almost a little bit of a relief, because I really didn't want to catch COVID. Got enough going on, thanks very much. Can't be doing COVID, although saying that, a couple of weeks where I have an illness, not a big deal. I had major back surgery 3 years ago, and I can deal with being laid up for a few weeks. But I think the scary thing for me is really having long COVID on top of what I have, because this was already identified as a possible viral infection that has led to the pancreatic insufficiency. So first few months actually were fine. Everyone was in the same boat. We came up with stuff that we could do at home to entertain ourselves. We've got a pack of cards, and we wrote things like we'd go to the opera or we'd go and have dinner. What that really meant was we'd get dressed up in some fancy clothes and we'd watch an opera on the TV. or we'd cook a really nice meal, or whatever it was. So we had lots of things to kind of to do. We had lots of Zooms with friends. There was lots of activities online as well. So theatre productions went online, comedy went online. We went to an online rave for my birthday. Yeah, I'm that old. But the point is, there was stuff to do, and it actually, I don't know, it kind of felt like, we're all in this together. But obviously, as restrictions have been or were loosened and then removed completely, it's kind of left, I think, myself, certainly the other clinically extremely vulnerable people that I know, and I guess maybe everyone else who is clinically extremely vulnerable, a little bit stranded. Life has kind of gone back to normal, whatever that is. And we've just been left to fend for ourselves, take our own precautions, try and convince people that we're not mad, that we're actually quite concerned about our health and the impact that getting COVID may have, and therefore we would really like to not catch it. So it's been really difficult, both from the perspective of having a life which was actually very full, really scaled back, and also, I guess, sort of having that that narrative really told you all the time about, this is nothing to worry about, don't be silly, this is just a cold. And I guess sort of, life has really changed from the perspective of, for me anyway, and possibly not that much different for some people previously, but that kind of option to, socialise, go travelling, go to theatre, go to galleries and restaurants, which are all things I really loved to do. They just don't feel safe anymore. I have got a first line of defence where I've had to, I had to have some surgery in December. So I have this, which is a FFP3 mask. So hopefully nothing's getting through that bad boy or bad girl in my case.
Can we just describe that for people who are listening to this rather than watching it?
Would you like to describe it, or shall I?
In many ways, so it's a large mask that covers a huge, obviously your mouth and your nose, but very heavy. I'd say it's like plastic. It's bright blue. It's quite a funky colour. I'm quite loving it. For me, it almost looks a little, I'm going to say a gas mask in terms of description for people, with large, something with large filters on the side, I guess, and sort of a nose at the end of it almost, I think, probably that holds the filters in or something. So it's pretty, and if you just talk for us, is it really muffled, or can we hear you?
I've been told that it's okay. So
you know what? That is surprisingly pretty good, actually. Yeah.
We had to get some work done in the house a few weeks ago, and I had to carry on working during this time. But clearly, I was not happy to not wear a mask at the time. So I was conducting my business calls with this on, and apparently I was audible.
Yeah, it's pretty good. We'll let you take it off, though, if you want to, George.
Just to demonstrate as well, there is the face shield.
As well. Lovely. Double down.
So, yeah.
Curiosity, what's your experience with that now, George? Because the fact that you get a lot less people wearing masks now. So, during the pandemic, which is still going on, but during the pandemic, when you had the regulations for people to wear masks and the like, it would often be sort of like, frowning at people that weren't wearing them. Whereas now, I suppose you're in the minority if you are wearing one. What is, did you get that? Is that, so if someone's coming to do work in your house, are you getting people thinking, why is this person wearing a mask? Or do you...
It varies. So some people will be like, absolutely no problem, I'll wear a mask as well. Anyone that comes to the house, I ask them to do a lateral flow beforehand. It's probably a bit problematic now. They're not widely available to everyone, but that's okay. I'll provide them. So very mixed. I think, the general messaging I guess I've had off a lot of people is that you just need to get out of this now. You just need to stop, like get on with life. It's for the living. And it's like, well, yeah, but I'd quite like to carry on living, which is kind of why I'm doing this. So, mixed reactions, definitely. But I think I've gone through the kind of real low of, I guess, not really understanding how we don't have a sense of collective responsibility. Whereas I completely understand why people want to pretend COVID is over. And I guess also feeling just really, really upset that we don't seem to want to have a really kind of caring society, but I live in a bit of an ideal world in my head. So yeah, it's been tough, I won't lie.
It's an interesting one because I think I've stopped wearing masks, I'll be honest, because it's quite refreshing not to. And so I've sort of embraced that. It took me a little while to get over it. So I don't tend to anymore. But I have to say, if I saw someone wearing that degree of mask, I'd think that person is really trying to protect themselves. Let me do my bit as well. Do you know what I mean? And do you see any of that at all in people or not really?
It's interesting actually, because we spoke about burns as well prior to this call, and I had to go to a burns clinic for a few weeks running recently, and my last visit they had stopped wearing masks in the hospital, and so I requested the nurse that was treating me to wear a mask. So even though I'd gone into the hospital with this on, with my face shield on, there wasn't ever an offer from her to put that on. And I think that the really interesting thing for me is that there is a massive power imbalance in a lot of relationships. So you get told, well, just ask us, just say. And no one really has an appreciation of actually how difficult that is to do, because by the very fact that you're not doing it means you don't want to do it. I've now got to ask you to do something that you don't want to do. And actually, is that going to have an impact on the treatment that I get? So it's actually in itself quite anxiety inducing that people are not saying, oh, would you like me to wear a mask? So it's the one thing people really could do that certainly for me would make a difference. And interestingly enough, and I haven't prepped this, but I ran a little Twitter poll on it a few weeks ago just to see how comfortable people are. And 80% of people are not, or 80% of people that answered the poll are not comfortable asking someone to wear a mask.
So let's take those triggers or those sort of points from other people and say, actually, other people ask. I think especially, I say that mask, I'm going to say is extreme, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's certainly different from the kind of paper masks almost that we see a lot of. Let's take note of that and kind of have a little bit of an insight into why that might be and do our bit as well. I'm going to move this on a little bit, but I was going to ask, it's the pandemic isn't over, this is still impacting on you, but that balance of the need or the want to get on with normal life, I'm doing that in inverted commas almost, what baby steps are you starting to take? Because it's just not possible, I guess, to keep yourself locked away in the house, is it?
No, and so we've had some really good news in the last couple of weeks, and we're now able to move out of London. So that's been a really big thing for me and my partner. And we're moving to the seaside, which will be really exciting. So we're going to be able to do more outdoorsy things, which is the thing that we're not really able to do in London. So the fact that it's summer as well, the weather's been great, has meant that I'm able to meet with people outside as well. So there are definitely some things I'm comfortable doing. There are some things I'm definitely not comfortable doing. But I guess as things evolve and we learn more about COVID, maybe I will get more comfortable. Haven't managed to go traveling yet, but we have been away. So we rented a camper van, which felt like a really safe thing to be able to do, to go both down to Cornwall and up to Scotland. So I've done John O'Groats and Land's End so far this year. I don't know where's next, but moving is the next big thing. And we're hoping that we'll be able to do lots of outdoorsy things, sailing, walking, bicycling, that kind of thing as weather and energy allows. So yeah, all good. But we're lucky. We're really lucky we can do that. A lot of people can't.
As someone who stayed in a camper van, where nothing to do with pandemic or anything at all, but to hear them sort of like sounding as sort of like a safe thing is wonderful. Good for you, George. I found it absolutely frightening the entire time I was in one. But
it was a bit frightening when we were on a cliff and there was like 45 miles an hour wind and the van was literally rocking. But other than that,
the only way to see the coast. I realise we're getting a little bit close on time for this, so it'd be good to find out actually, George, where, obviously other than the advice service, but where our listeners and viewers can find you online.
Oh, well, I would say definitely come and visit me on Advice. I'm on LinkedIn. If you would like to see the professional side of me, just Georgina Wright. And I'm also on Twitter, which I ironically have found to be quite a supportive community if you engage with the right people. And you can see me or hear me rant on there. And I'm at George_works, because despite everything, I think I still do work. More or less.
Absolutely, you work. Gosh, you work hard for us on that advice service. It is kind of one of the fantastic resources, but I'm not doing a plug for that. But
I'm just going to say, plugging BDF now.
Yeah, I know. That was like really cheesy, wasn't it? We're marvellous. So, yeah, we're going to our Alan Partridge moments there, aren't we, Dan? We're trying to avoid that one. Thank you so much, George, for joining us today and for sharing. And we really wanted to get this message across to people that actually the pandemic isn't over. And although normality is resumed for many people, there's a number of people. I mean, you talked about numbers last time when we spoke. How many people do we think might still be shielding?
It's about 2 million, something like that. It's pretty high. It may be less. I haven't depressed myself by keeping on top of how badly quite a few of us are living, but it was yeah, I think it was about 2 million people that were told to shield. So, but please correct.
Let's all just be a little bit more considerate, a little bit more observant, and see what we can do to support each other a little bit more around this stuff. So thank you for sharing that story, George. I think that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you for listening. You can find future episodes on major streaming platforms. Search Business Disability Forum or at businessdisabilityforum.org.uk and search podcasts. You can also watch the series on our YouTube channel. Search for Business Disability Forum. Please do share and leave us a rating. Business Disability Forum is the leading business membership organisation in disability inclusion. We work in partnership with business, government and disabled people to remove barriers to inclusion. businessdisabilityforum.org.uk